Hello there, everybody. This is Cholera, and I'm joined with Diggity and Klazer. We're going to be doing the OSL semifinals, Fantasy versus Jaedong, August 14, 2009. And this promises to be a very, very epic matchup between two players who are semi-rivals, of course. Jaedong, known as the Legend Killer. All of them, by the way, have grown gills prior to qualifying for the round of 8. They were required to by the OSL. Just so you know, and to become Olympic-class swimmers, which is why they're underwater. I have no idea. I don't know if that's CGI or if they were actually underwater. But anyway, Jaedong is facing off against Fantasy. Fantasy, of course, has been stymied in his runs for the OSL titles twice in a row. And the first time was by Jaedong, by the way, who he almost beat in the Bacchus OSL finals. So definitely a rivalry of a sort between one of the best Terran players and pretty much indisputably the best Zerg around. So, by the way, the MSL was played the day before between Jaedong and Calm. I'm not going to spoil the results. Diggity, what do you think about this matchup? I mean, sorry, Klazer, what do you think about this matchup?
Yeah, I'm going to say a little bit of a spoiler here because and it looks like we're just entering into the countdown right now, 5-4. But yeah, a little bit of a spoiler for those of you guys who haven't watched the Shinhan Bank Pro League finals. Go and watch them now. Pause this, go watch them now, come back to this because they will be spoiled for you. They were played a week ago, so most of you guys, I'm sure, have seen the results by now. But yeah, Jaedong came completely unstuck in that tournament, and that's when people started crying, started saying slump, slump, slump. Something that's a favorite topic of Diggity's, and I'll let him elaborate more on that. But I don't think Jaedong won a single matchup in the Pro League finals, and 2 of the matches that he lost were to Fantasy. Crucially, on day 2, he lost his first game to Fantasy, and if he'd won that, he potentially might have not even needed an ace match, and then he went ahead and lost a second game again when the ace match finally did come around. So Jaedong has a huge bone to pick with you. I think somewhere in the past I've heard it said that Jaedong believes the Pro League is more important to him as a title than any other title. So he is absolutely raging. He must be absolutely furious about that. The question is, how much of a mental reserve does he have to come back and bounce back from that? He's obviously in the finals of the MSL, which were... Sorry, I don't know if he's in the finals. Sorry, he was in the semifinals of the MSL that I think was played yesterday. I'm not sure what happened in that. That was against Calm, and he's now in the OSL semifinals. So he has got a lot on his shoulders. He's got a lot to deal with. This is Heartbreak Ridge, by the way. Jaedong starting up at the 9 o'clock position, Fantasy at the 3 o'clock position. But yeah, this is going to be massive, and everything on the line here between these two players. Fantasy really wants to capture that title. I think most people would already consider him to be an S-Class Terran, but we all know that it doesn't matter if you're S-Class unless you actually get a couple of titles under your belt. That's what you really need to cement your name, and that's what Fantasy is going to be looking to do. Jaedong, of course, he wants to be known as the best player, the best Zerg player of all time, and definitely the best player of all time, and winning a title is going to go a long way towards helping him secure that.
Really clever here from Fantasy, building his barracks above on that ramp, so Jaedong might get a little bit confused, might suspect a 14cc off the bat, which would be suicidal on this map. So he's basically trying to get Jaedong to be a little bit more aggressive, be a little less economically in the early game. This is the thing, Fantasy is extremely, although he's going to see the gas, so he knows he's going to be going for some sort of standard pseudo-Fantasy build involving the Valkyries. That's one thing about Fantasy, and now he's going to scout it, so not going to be taken out for long. That's one thing about Fantasy. He's very, very strong against Zerg. I thought he was a brilliant choice for SKT because he's particularly strong against Mutalisk, which is really Jaedong's bread and butter. Jaedong going for the expansion, now going for his pool, so it looks like he went for a 12 hatch there. But yeah, a lot of people are like, oh, Jaedong's slumping, Jaedong's slumping. Give the man a break. He's in the semifinals in 2 different individual leagues, and he's in the championship of the Pro League. It's kind of like, I mean, it would be, he's slumping because he's not winning every single championship. I mean, seriously, he's just playing a really high caliber level of player. He's just got a lot of pressure on his shoulders, and he's playing a frickin' lot of games. I don't think he's slumping at all, and I think this will be a big indicator right here. So we'll see how he plays in this match. If he does get knocked out of all 3, I would say he had a good run, and then he just kind of faltered at the end. I'm not going to say that, oh, you know, he's playing terribly all of a sudden, because he's still, you know, in the semifinals of 2 individual leagues and the finals of Pro League, and basically carried his team all the way there. Looks like Fantasy is going to set up for his standard build. Let's see if Jaedong has something creative against that, because I think really the key to the match is Fantasy almost always produces that. Ooh, gets the SCV Scout. Oh, just barely manages to lose his SCV Scout there on the front door. Nice play by Jaedong. Really frustrated, and I think that was more a mental stance for him than anything. But really, I think the key for Jaedong in this game is when the Valkyrie comes out, is sniping it with those Scourge, taking it out early, and making kind of that big statement, which is, you cannot play against me, heads up. Your strongest game, your TVZ will not stand up against mine.
I think absolutely. You know what you were saying. I was just thinking of the word flash, which means a flash of brilliance that lasts for a short amount of time, or a burst of light, and also refers perhaps to Flash's career, or at least his ascendancy, not his career. He's still doing. I still think he's doing fine, but obviously Flash was in situations like Jaedong, so we'll see if Jaedong ends up being like Flash and not being able to handle all the pressure, or if he really is superhuman and he can be more like a boxer player back in the day, a real true bourgeois who could handle everything, or Savior back in the day when he could be in all the leagues and win them. We're just gonna have to see though. Looks like we're gonna have a 3 hatchery Lair Hydra build here from Jaedong, a pretty good, strong econ reaction against any kind of mech opening here. And Fantasy is going to go 1 factory into Command Center. As Diggity noted, this is something that commonly Fantasy does. We're going to see whether he goes for Vulture drops also. I think, certainly it's possible he's going to go for those Valkyries. And there is the starport. Good call, Diggity. Most likely, well, actually, we don't know yet. This could actually be for Vulture drops. Given that we're seeing this early machine shop upgrade here, most likely it's going to be Mines, though. We'll see if he gets, speed afterwards, or if he just decides to go Valkyries. There's a lot of options, of course. But right now it's, both are just kind of cagily looking at each other. Neither is trying any kind of very cheesy opening here, and this is sort of standard for what I'd expect out of Fantasy and Jaedong, because they respect each other. Obviously, Fantasy came within the. Don't forget, I mean, Fantasy's not. I wouldn't say he's worse than Jaedong at all. I mean, in their heads-up matchups, because Jaedong was taken to the verge of defeat in the Bacchus OSL, a few months ago. Down 2-0, and then he managed to win the next 3. So this is another best of 5. This is going to be a long series, and I'm sure both are practicing for it very much. Here we got a couple of Vultures in the front. Jaedong looks prepared though. Got a Sunken and a couple of Hydras.
Yeah, Jaedong definitely prepared for this. The Vulture's just laying a couple of Spider Mines down, and I actually like the use of Spider Mines by Fantasy, because he's just putting the Spider Mines down on the map. Not only is this going to give him scouting information, but it's just going to mean that his opponent can't push across the map and get that sort of position. And a lot of Terran versus Zerg, especially in large maps, and now Jaedong actually cleverly has brought that Overlord around. He's just going to snipe a couple of those Spider Mines. Fantasy trying to sneak in with the Vultures, but Jaedong kept a couple of Hydras back to make sure that he didn't do that. And now Jaedong is starting up that Spire. Fantasy has got the first dropship coming out, so no Valkyries as yet from Fantasy. I haven't seen an armory from either, so we might indeed be seeing a potential for a Vulture drop, which I think Jaedong might have semi-anticipated and will be well placed to deal with if Fantasy does come for that. Now Fantasy coming in with the dropship. This is going to be critical. Jaedong has got Overlord well positioned as well, so I think he should be able to see this and counter it, but his Heartless could potentially be a little bit out of position. He's actually moved those Heartless out onto the ridge. He doesn't have too much in his main, but he should be able to bring them back and react quickly enough and pull his drones away, and it's going to be down to Jaedong's reaction, how quickly he reacts. That one Heartless is going to see that dropship potentially. No, it's not. The Heartless are coming back. Yeah, Jaedong's now spotted it. The Vultures are dropping, and he's immediately putting the Spider Mines down. Jaedong could be in trouble here in terms of his economy. He should have been better prepared for this, but now he's losing a bunch of drones. He's lost 3 or 4 drones already. 4 drones, 5 drones go down. Now the Heartless finally come into play, but there are still Spider Mines in there, so Jaedong is going to be a little bit delayed in clearing out and retaking his main. Those Vultures aren't going to do too much damage. Oh my god, Spider Mine takes down about 3 Heartless. Ouch. So I think Fantasy's strategy has paid off for him. He's done a lot of damage. He's also stopped Jaedong getting gas crucially from his main, limiting him to one gas. Now Fantasy with those 2 Vultures trying to run by. He's going to get a couple more drone kills. Fantasy, I think, might have just won that game right now. In a game between players of such high calibers, such differences do decide victory and defeat, and Fantasy having killed something like 6 to 8 drones, as well as 3 or 4 Heartless with 4 Vultures, and I think he saved his dropship as well. I don't know if that's recoverable for Jaedong, although he's just had a bunch of drones pop out from all of his larvae.
Diggity, we up?
Sorry, I had a little bit of lag there to Klazert, having a little bit of lag spikes back and forth, so I was kind of waiting for his audio to end. Anyway, it looks like this is the standard style of play for Fantasy. Is if he faces Hydralisks early, he goes drop. If he faces Melisks early, he builds the Valkyrie. But ooh, Science Vessel snipe right off the bat. That's really going to help out in some of the economic. Oh man, that hurts a lot. So no irradiates, or at least early in the game. I do like Jaedong's choice of going Hydralisk first, because I think that Fantasy doesn't play as well against Hydralisks, particularly basically into this stage of the game. So let's see what Jaedong can pull out. Looks like he is got a front door contain, because this is the hard transition point, and he's bringing in some Mutalisks actually. And let's see. I don't know that Fantasy's going to be prepared for this tech switch. He's got a turret up. He's got a couple turrets, but he doesn't have his Valkyrie up, and he doesn't have a lot of Marines on the ground. So this combination attack, I think, is going to be very, very powerful, especially if Jaedong decides to harass along one of these edges and then kind of attack at the other front, or if he can run in and pick off the tank really fast. So he's got, okay, yeah, here come the Mutalisks, and particularly that barracks line is going to be extremely vulnerable, because as you can see, there's not any turrets protecting it, and there's just not enough Marines really to force them back, in my opinion. So he can just hover here and kill Marines all day, and it looked like that's what he's going to do. Right now, yeah, with the Science Vessel production, those Mutalisks are just roaming free. He's going to have to wait for an Irradiate, and that's really going to set Fantasy back. He's going to have to wait for basically Jaedong to get his third gas, his tech up, and Jaedong's going to easily be able to contain and slow down any sort of push he's trying to put together in the meantime. 2 Vultures running out in the field, but that Sunken Colony should be able to take care of it. I think there should be 1 or 2 Hydralisks down out of the larva. Let's see the timing on this. No! The Vultures managed to get into that bottom left-hand corner before the Hydralisks pop. There's the first Hydralisk, so 2 drone kills, but still I think Jaedong's in a great position. He's got his third gas going, and Fantasy isn't really in a position to, well, that looks, I take it back, it looks like that front door contain is now pulling back. I don't think Fantasy is still going to have an army really in the timing he wants to push against Jaedong and his quick tech to Hive.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Fantasy's build is that he needs to do damage with his harassment because he doesn't have a lot of economy. Whoa! Hold that thought, though. Good Irradiate. Obviously, any Irradiate in the clump of Mutalisks is a big danger. Jaedong splits it out in a medium amount of time. Not perfect, but not bad. Jaedong is going to have to be careful with his Mutalisks, and soon, no matter what, I mean, even if he's Jaedong, and he is Jaedong, he can't, he can't really use Mutalisks against Science Vessels when they have Irradiate. I mean, it's just going to be super hard. So he is going to go to Hive Tech, of course. He's probably going to have to go for some Lurkers also, although we haven't seen any yet. But that was going to be the next transition. I mean, we could possibly see a switch into Ultras straight off with Defilers to sort of go as an intermediary between his current tech and just pure Ultras. That would be a difficult move, but that could be effective. I don't know. We're going to have to see most likely Lurkers still, and Jaedong continue to go for it. He knows that his Mutalisks have a very limited lifespan, so he might as well use them to try to do as much damage as he can. Those are the Lurkers right there. Jaedong also had slightly later upgrades. His Evolution Chamber just finished about a minute ago, but same as Fantasy, of course, because he started off with a slightly mech opening, yeah, basically, and now he's building, we just saw him build his second engineering base, so the upgrades are not going to be a big factor. Jaedong's ahead, I mean, I would say right now, although Fantasy is moving out now with his first real push, 0-0 though for Fantasy, it makes a big difference. Jaedong's still going to get those two-shot kills on those Marines with the Lurkers. That's going to be very, very useful for him. And, the harassment, I actually would say, was not super successful, mainly because Jaedong went Hydras. Even though the 4 Vultures were highly cost-effective, overall the damage wasn't done, and Jaedong was able to pick up his third. There is Fantasy trying to just move out Jaedong with a good number of Lurkers blocking and some Scourge to scare the Science Vessels. It's going to be a close one to see whether Jaedong is going to go for, he's going to get the tech on time. I think he will.
Yeah, the key here is that Jaedong actually has already got his Defiler mount up. For a Zerg player, when you're expecting a Terran to make that kind of mid-game push, you want to have your Defilers up before the Terran can get up to your Sunken line, and Jaedong's done a great job of delaying Fantasy. Jaedong now once again coming to try and snipe that Science Vessel. Fantasy pulling it back, however, within the protection of Marines. Jaedong has still got a decent-sized Mutalisk force out there, Fantasy now pushing forward, but you feel Jaedong probably has enough to hold this. As long as he can win that first engagement against Fantasy's forces, he should be in a very strong position going forward in this game, because the longer the game goes on the way it is right now, Jaedong's position should get stronger and stronger, and I thought Fantasy had really delivered almost a killing blow to Jaedong with that harass where he killed so many drones. I think a lesser Zerg player would not have been able to recover, but the fact that Jaedong anticipated Fantasy actually looks like he could be potentially pincered here in the valley between those two high grounds. He's got 3 Science Vessels out though, and this is going to be critical if Jaedong can snipe these in the middle of this battle, but Fantasy doing a good job of protecting those Science Vessels. So far, Jaedong hasn't been able to get more than 1 kill. I think he killed 1 Science Vessel earlier, but now his entire army is pincered between Jaedong's forces, and there's no retreat. He cannot escape, so he has to do or die here. Fantasy pushing forward, snipes one of the Lurkers, but Jaedong has got a large group of Zerglings and Mutalisks behind Fantasy's forces, cutting off reinforcements, and now Jaedong has got the Defilers out, and Fantasy could lose his entire army. And now the Defilers coming out, swarm over went to the Marines, pulling back with an attack range. Now Jaedong's going to come from behind as well, and Fantasy's forces are going to be pincered here. Those Swarm is going to be over those Siege Stacks, and Fantasy is going to lose his entire army. Jaedong coming in, he's going to lose all the Marines. And okay, Jaedong, Fantasy managed to actually hold. Jaedong's not able to get the Swarm up on the Lurkers behind the tank, so Fantasy actually holds that attack and holds off Jaedong's forces, and actually that's very bad for Jaedong. I thought it was a clever maneuver pincering Fantasy's forces there, but now Jaedong suiciding his Mutalisks, and actually this is going to be GG to Fantasy. Fantasy's going to take this, but I just want to say very quickly, as Fantasy actually puts the pressure on Jaedong as he's defending. Jaedong now fighting back desperately, but he doesn't have a lot of force. He's only got a handful of Zerglings and Defilers. He's lost most of his Lurkers, so I really don't think that Jaedong's going to be able to come back in this game. I think Fantasy's position is too strong, and Fantasy's retaken that rear, so he can reinforce and put pressure on Jaedong at that 7 o'clock expo. Perhaps I'm wrong about that, but I think Fantasy actually defended brilliantly there. Jaedong trying to get a sneak expo up at the 5 o'clock position. 5 o'clock position. That's going to get taken on. But sorry for ranting for so long. I just wanted to say that I think the reason Jaedong managed to stay in the game was because the moment he saw those vultures in his base, he basically used all of his larvae to build drones, and that's why he wasn't as far behind economically as he otherwise would have been.
I still think he ended up with a decent economic hit, and I think that's why we saw such a delay on that Defiler, and specifically why you didn't have multiple Defilers out with a good amount of Swarm to really to completely crush that attack. And I gotta say, if Fantasy doesn't manage to do economic harass in the future against this exact build, I think you could see a much different outcome to the early pushes. And the other comment I want to make, Scourge getting irradiated out in the field. Nice Defiler kind of push though, but it's just not enough Lurkers under there to really do as much damage as I think he wants to. It looks like he only got 2 Marines, and now I still think Fantasy has a decent sized army that hasn't been crushed. It's still running free. Jaedong kind of isolated still to these bases, and Fantasy just can keep testing this edge, pushing forward the tanks, keep pushing back, and I think, yeah, he's going to have a lot of success with this. Another nice irradiate and a lot of Marines. No Swarm. There's the Swarm, but this is a nice engagement for him. Let's see if he can pick the Science Missiles. Manages to take 1, but holds the rest. And stops Jaedong's army, and he's probably got more reinforcements coming in through the map, because this is still an initial army. He's also trying to take that 1 o'clock expansion. Ooh, and a dropship. That's going to hurt a lot. But I want to say, keep in mind, this is what I think Jaedong wanted to do on Outsider. The issue is Fantasy did not go with his standard build. This is essentially, another big engagement here. A couple tanks getting taken out, more tanks getting taken out. And Jaedong actually able to wipe out the army there while Fantasy was distracted someplace. But yeah, I guess I'll hand it over to Cholera because I've just been kind of ranting for so long. Upper left-hand corner is going to get taken out. But I think this is what Jaedong wanted to play against in the in Pro League, and this is now what he's going to play against. So I think, even though it looks like he's a little bit behind in this game, I think as the games progress, he's going to have more and more success with this build or little adjustments on this build.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole time I wanted to start saying, I don't think the game's over at all. I think, Jaedong is certainly capable of coming back, although, Fantasy has been playing great. Jaedong got a couple units in preparation for this drop. Not going to be able to clean it up as quickly, though, as I thought he would, given that I think he saw it coming. So this could actually be something that swings the game permanently to Fantasy, but I've been accused of calling games too soon, and I think this game is still close. Jaedong was unable to take down the nucleus of Fantasy's army. Now he was able to. Those tanks went down, and let's not forget, Fantasy does not have a third. He has taken down Jaedong's production at his main, though, but he just now has a third up, and he needs it up desperately, of course, because he's probably mined out. But this drop, man, this drop has done tremendous damage, stopping the gas mining, possibly going to kill even more drones, but now finally cleaning it up. Jaedong is going to clean it up, but I mean, it is such a close game still. Fantasy just playing great slightly before then with his little move on the top of the hill. I don't know what Jaedong's thinking with those lings. I mean, maybe just the limits of Jaedong's control even. But that third base is up, and Fantasy, if he can keep that third base, is going to have a solid lead. If he can't keep that third base, Jaedong has his opportunity. It's going to be so close, though. Jaedong just, struggling to stay alive. Fantasy with another drop. Man, Jaedong has not been able to cope with his drops, and I think it's because of the lack of units basically for him. He's also just running very low on resources, especially without his main base, and now he can lose these buildings. I think now we can possibly call it over. If he loses all these buildings, really he's going to be in huge trouble. Jaedong without Defilers moving up in the middle, and this is going to get slaughtered. It gets slaughtered. Jaedong trying to go for a counter. This, wow, no Defilers, man. I mean, just the loss of that one gas in the main really hurt. GG from Jaedong. You guys were right, but I do think Jaedong still had a chance. But in the end, that dropship was the nail in the coffin there.
Yeah, I think we definitely called it perhaps a little too early there. I think both Diggity and I were guilty of that. I know I was. But Fantasy did seem to be a little bit ahead. I just think that at this level, I mean, this is something now people might say that I'm a little bit dogmatic in my thinking about the way StarCraft works. But the way I feel it is that at this level of play between pros of this caliber, the games are so close that any small advantage is seized upon, and these pros don't let it go, especially not a player of Fantasy's level. And once you lose something like 8 drones to your opponent that early on in the game, I just don't think you can recover from that, no matter how good you are. And I really think that ultimately that little advantage was what continued to accumulate, unless Jaedong had been able to do something counter to it, but he wasn't. Fantasy defended brilliantly well, and perhaps it looked like Fantasy was a little bit behind the 8 ball compared to where he should have been, because he had invested so much in those vultures and getting that dropship out that he looked like perhaps Jaedong was still in a decent position. And Jaedong, of course, did cleverly produce a lot of drones from all his larvae when he saw that Fantasy came in with that drop and nullified some of it. But I still don't think that kind of disadvantage is something you can really recover from.
I don't think I called it too early, mostly because Jaedong wasn't able to cap that additional base, and he was behind on upgrades, which is why he couldn't take care of those attacks with the Zerglings. He had level 2 weapons, level 2 armor. The Zerglings only at level 1 carapace. He needed Ultralisks at that stage to really contend with Fantasy's army, and without the additional gas, I didn't think he was going to go there. So all Fantasy needed to do was supplement his army with the Firebats, which is what he did, and took out the game, I would say, pretty handily, although those drops were extremely nice. But I still think, even though Fantasy took this game, Jaedong's going to have, I still think he's kind of feeling this build out, so I think he's actually going to have a lot of success in the games to come. I think it's going to be up to Fantasy to adjust what he is doing. This match, the early Vulture drop obviously caught Jaedong off guard. I think Jaedong's going to be a little bit more aware. I think he's going to I think he should open up Hydralisk and continue to open up Hydralisk, except on the maps that completely do not warrant it. For Outsider, for example. But again, as long as I think as long as Fantasy plays his standard game, I think Jaedong's going to be able to adapt, and he's going to be able to come and have some success here.
Yep,
yeah, I think Diggity does have a good point. Sorry,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think Diggity has a really good point about the upgrades, because especially in that final drop that we saw from Fantasy inside Jaedong's main, Fantasy had 2 upgrades on his infantry, so that's huge. On his Marines, and that's why he had something like 4 or 5 Marines and a couple of medics, and Jaedong sent in stream after stream of Zerglings and other units, and he just wasn't able to kill that drop off. And then Fantasy, of course, he managed to kill a couple of the Marines. Fantasy still kept it alive, and then brought reinforcements in, and at that stage you could just see the difference in the situation between the 2 players really showing, and that's when it was pretty much over, obviously, by that stage.
Yeah, I mean, really, I think basically, I think Fantasy just was able to keep that nucleus alive. I was mainly referring to, when Jaedong lost that battle right in the middle when, Fantasy was on top of the hill. I don't think the game was over at that time, although Fantasy definitely picked up the lead because, Clauser, you're absolutely right. Players do not generally, they're generally very good at holding on to a lead when they are both at really high levels. But at the same time, well, I mean, I would say the other player is very good at taking away the lead, just as much as one player is good at keeping the lead against a good player. I mean, I think, we can really just say who's ahead at any given time, but sometimes we do see such surprises, and often we do call them wrong. Not that I have anything problem with calling them earlier. It's all good. Anyway, we're going to see the next game on Outsider. I have no additional thoughts. I agree completely with what you're saying about the upgrades, big factor, and Jaedong not being able to get up that 4th base really made it impossible for him to get the units he needed. I think, though, that Jaedong definitely has holes that he can exploit in Fantasy's game. I think Fantasy plays a little loose and fast with his tanks sometimes. I think a lot of times they're not fully protected by his Marines, and Jaedong possibly could have an opportunity to snipe them. Fantasy gets strung out a little bit with his reinforcements. That's why Jaedong was able to kill his entire army for a second there near the end. Closing thoughts from you guys?
None really.
All right.
GG.
Looks
yeah.
like we're good. GG's. See you in the next game.